Okay, it's saying connecting.
Mm.
Okay, I think we're live here.
Hello,
Right.
whoever's joined
Hi.
us live. Welcome from two different lands. I'm here in Somerset in England, and Hoppy, where are you?
I am on the shores of Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, surrounded by some bugs. So I hope if you see me swatting something, that's what's going on.
Well, thank you for joining us for this conversation, which I've been really excited about. It feels to me that you're touching on something very essential of what's been lost in our culture, really, in these times, which is this awareness of death and the life cycles as being what can really inspire us to live well. So perhaps we could just start with just taking a moment to arrive together. And in that, just really feeling into the landscape of your body. If it helps, you can close your eyes. Maybe take a few deeper breaths. And being aware of this flow of air that brings life into your body. This breath that could be taken away at any moment. This body that could drop and shed. Returning to the earth. And what is left? What remains when this body dies? And if you notice any sensations relating to fear, can you breathe into your heart? Can you breathe this sense of trust that you are a part of nature and these cycles of life and death and rebirth are the very reason that we are here, to transform, to grow, to forget, to remember, to return. May this conversation today be something in way of remembering how to live well, to die well, to be present with each moment of this miraculous unfolding of life. And then just closing this with a nice full breath in, giving thanks to this air that we breathe and all that enables us to breathe. And then opening your eyes and just looking around where you are and seeing in this reality of appearances where there is beauty that surrounds you. Mm. Oh, here we are, Hoppy. Good to be here in this moment of
Yeah.
living.
Mm.
Where would you like to start? Is there any questions stirring for you, or shall I something of you?
Well, I'm just wondering, the thing that's popping into my head is what do cycles mean to you in the context of life and death and rebirth?
Mm. It was a big turning point for me when I started to track the wheel of the year and the seasonal festivals and the lunar cycles. Because prior to that, all of our kind of cultural conditioning had just educated me in this way of linear thinking, that there is this beginning and there is an ending and we just move between the two. And from tracking the cycles and living more closely with nature, it became clear that there are these cycles of regeneration and transformation, and how necessary death is a part of that. And so, I mean, nature really is giving us all the answers that we need. And for me, cycles can be honored in ceremony and rituals, rite of passage, to be able to really honor where there are thresholds in our lives. And for me, that brings more of a sense of living intentionally and consciously about where there are phases in our lives and seasons in our lives where we've outgrown something, or something's no longer working for us, or we're ready for some kind of change, or, rebranding. And so consciously having some kind of threshold, or holding a space to be able to perhaps grieve for what you're letting go of, to also make peace with the past, and where there might be regrets, is there anything that you can do to make amends? And then we can step more intentionally into the next chapter of this cycle. It might be that we think of this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, as we're coming up to winter solstice, as this moment of death and rebirth. So that come spring, we have everything that we need, all that's composted from our last cycle of growth is now able to nourish the seeds that we want to create in the world. And being more present with that cycle helps me to understand more of the different phases that I'm in, bringing more acceptance to where I'm at. If there's times, this year, for example, I felt has been quite a fallow year for me. After being very outward and visible for a few years, I felt that I needed to have more of a wintering phase to really let things compost and die and see what wants to emerge from that. So living our lives in a cyclical way, and being aligned with the rhythms of nature, the rhythms of the cosmos, help to give this deeper sense of appreciation for the moment that we live in now, without so much of the striving to where we want to get to, or dwelling in the past. There's something of really showing up for this moment. And when we are more present with reality as it unfolds, we're likely to cultivate more gratitude and wonder, compassion for others. And in that, for me, it's about really living well to be able to die well and to become a good ancestor eventually. So all of life really is the training. And I think that cycles can help us tap into something much deeper than what our current kind of capitalist culture is offering us of what life is, where we are quite devoid of meaning in a lot of ways. And I think, you could speak to this, but for me, a lot of the crises of meaning is because we've turned away from death, because we want to numb ourselves from feeling, well, the discomfort, the fear around that, because we're afraid of endings. We're afraid of how we can make peace with something that feels like we're having to surrender or let go of everything that we have cultivated and grown in our lives. But to die well for me is like, how can I show up completely unencumbered? And I have a teacher who is in his late 70s. And for the last few years, he has been really meeting this threshold of death that is closer to him now, in ways that have really moved me and made me reflect on things that I'm quite attached to, in terms of sort of more, let's say, sacred objects that I've received through initiation rites. And for instance, he buried his medicine hat on Dartmoor. He returned his staff to the woods. He sang his soul song into a hole in his garden and buried it, never to be sung again. And he's actually digging his own grave. That's something that he always said he wanted to do. And in his fearlessness, in his meeting of death in that way, it just brings to light for me where there can be actually joy and excitement and magic around the dying and the death process, which isn't something we're, supported in or educated in at all. And that's why I've been so moved by your offering on Substack, Hoppy. It feels like you're really touching into what needs to be brought to light. I wonder if you'd like to speak a little around, you're working you're trained as a death doula, and your senses of being in that space with people at the threshold of their dying. How does that inspire people, do you think, to live more fully when they're alive?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, firstly, I never in a million years thought death would be what I did, or the area in which I worked. It came at me from left field. Um, it really came at me from various deaths I've already had in my life. And yeah, over time, I came to realize that because I've had several near-death experiences, that perhaps death was something I should work with. It came to me after listening to Ram Dass, the philosopher, talking about how working with dying people, or sitting with dying people, is the highest work he'd ever done. And at the time, I was experiencing some panic attacks because my business was suffering and dying. And because I was so wrapped up in my business, I also felt like I was dying. And so I started to have these panic attacks, and listening to Ram Dass at night to try and calm me down so I could get a good night's sleep. And suddenly this epiphany came, and yeah, the question popped into my head whether I was supposed to work with death or not. And that was a moment where my purpose deepened. And right after that, I started training as a soul midwife, which is a type of an end of life doula. And as I started to do this very, very beautiful work, learning about death and the dying process, I started to spot something else, which very quickly revealed itself to be my real calling, which was that the more we're able to step into our fear, and the ultimate fear is the fear of death, the more we learn how to live fully. And this really appealed to me. And when I sort of looked around, it didn't feel like many people were doing much about this piece of wisdom that felt to me like a very obvious piece of logic that could help lots and lots of people, that was hiding in plain sight. So I wrote a book about this, and I'm now releasing this book as a Substack newsletter. But yeah, there's this correlation between stepping towards the fear, and the more we learn how to embrace our mortality and learn to acknowledge and be aware of our mortality, the more we're able to step out of our comfort zones, to step beyond the limiting beliefs and fears that hold us back from discovering our true potential and purpose in life. So there's this kind of direct correlation between these two things. So yeah, my work now is wholeheartedly about making people aware of this logic that's available to anyone, and giving them the practical tools and guidance to go from the simple act of acknowledging your mortality to stepping deeper into alignment with life and with purpose. And part of that is understanding that the cycles of life are critical to our understanding of our place in this life, on this planet, in this universe. And I love to look around just in nature and see the repeating cycles and patterns in nature that often are very mathematical. If you look at the shell of on a beach, you'll see the Fibonacci spirals. And everywhere you look in nature, you see these repeating patterns of sacred geometry. And for me, they're all little reminders that everything is this delightful and beautiful cycle of repeating patterns. And there's great comfort to be taken from that, I believe.
Mm. Makes me think about the value of cultures where there were initiation rites or rites of passage at particular thresholds in the life cycle. Because if you think about the Native American vision quest, that would have happened usually from sort of adolescence into adulthood. And it was very much about that individual going into the wild to be able to meet their death in some way, and in that meet their fear. And in 4 days and 4 nights of fasting and being out with the elements, out with spirit, they would cry for a vision for their life. And we might think of that vision as what gives your life purpose. And then they would return to the community. And it was really about understanding in that meeting of death and fear, that the self, we become less attached to the self, that there's something of a sort of dissolution of this, like the solidity of the sense of me or I. And we bring the gift back because we want to offer it as a gift to the community. Like it's not something that we just hold on to because I am part of something so much bigger. I'm not alone. I'm not isolated. And I think not having those kinds of rites of passage in our culture means that we're kind of continuing through this dream, essentially, without marking these really significant transitions, which, if we did, we would have more opportunity in a safe container with elders, with guides, to be able to meet death in perhaps a less confronting way. Like, I suppose it's slightly more controlled. And I undertook my own initiation around 28 when it was my Saturn returns. And it was a year preparation with the yew tree to then enact a ceremony on my birthday. And I didn't know whether I would survive. And that was for me, like, that's what a real initiation was asking of me, was to really confront death in that way. And I remember, I won't go into the details of what I did, but there was a point when I was sort of waiting, like, is death going to claim me? When I just, after some time of feeling a bit kind of excited, I suppose a bit scared, I fell into the deepest sense of peace, that there was something of being willing to meet death and really look it in the eye and say, okay, I'm here if you want me. That helped reframe my relationship with death in a really big way that has continued, because I realized it wasn't something to avoid or fear, that there was always the right timing. And I think, nature cycles show us that as well. And it also helped me be less attached to this idea that there was some particular purpose that I needed for my life, like a one vision, that actually our purpose is continually evolving. And at that point, there was an intention for my life that maybe lasted for a few years. And what I feel I'm in now is a phase of reconfiguration around my life's purpose. And it can feel a bit like I'm a bit lost and a bit rudderless. I'm not quite sure where to put my energy, what to be creating and growing. But inwardly, I can feel that there is this phase of dying that's happening, and it can't be rushed. And actually, there's something of a real humility that's asked of us when we go through these cycles in our lives of death to parts of ourselves, that's helping us prepare for this sort of final threshold of death. And so you spoke about your business, like in your life, you've obviously had a few confrontations with death and with dying. How do you think that's changed your sort of relationship with death around fear, for instance?
I mean, I won't lie, there is still part of me that is scared of dying, and I think that is baked into the human ego. I believe that it's part of our journey in life to try to overcome as much as possible one's fears, so that when the moment of death does arrive, you can transition with as much peace as possible. There's a beautiful expression that I love, which is life is the art of learning how to die as consciously as possible.
Mm.
And part of the work I've been doing recently to add sort of credibility to my project is looking back in time at sort of philosophers, people of note, and there's this amazing correlation that everyone from Abraham Lincoln to Socrates to they've all talked about the importance of dying before you die. So learning through all the little deaths that we experience in our life, whether that's the failure of a relationship or a business going under. We've all had many of these micro deaths, and learning from them so that when death does come, we're as prepared as possible for it.
Mm.
And yeah, there's a lot of people who have spoken about this, and it's I think very, very important. If you look at Carl Jung, for example, the second half of his life was devoted almost exclusively towards this idea of learning how to die before you die. He's got this beautiful quote, which is, "Where your fear is, there is your task." And this has become a cornerstone quote for myself. Every time I'm at a crossroads, every time I'm wondering what I should do next, I feel into what is it that I'm most scared of,
Mm,
and the thing that I'm most scared of is what I should do next, and
mm,
allowing the fear to become a guide,
mm,
actually, because the more we step into our fear, the more we grow. We step beyond our comfort zones, we stretch, and we discover that what we were scared of
mm,
really isn't as scary as our mind built up for ourselves. And the more you get used to that, the more you train and practice that, the more your fears in general reduce down, and the more you step into deeper potential in life.
mm. We can also, in that sort of same vein, practice where we have our fears around death, but also in different areas of our life. I'm thinking of the Buddhist tradition where there's a lot of emphasis in particularly the Mahayana and the Theravadan traditions around meditation on death. To the point, they would encourage monks to go and sit in the charnel grounds to watch the decomposing bodies and meditate on their own body disintegrating and becoming bones. They'd have, skeletons in the meditation halls sometimes. And that for me is really telling that, as you say, there's been people for so long throughout history pointing to this as something which is really meaningful in terms of helping us to meet where there are those fears and maybe where we avoid going because we want to just stay in this comfort zone and what's familiar. And that for me is just going to end up with a life that's half lived. And usually, by a point we get very frustrated with ourselves, with the world around us, because we're not living how we wish to live. And I often, I work with people around transitions and thresholds. And I often heard people say, they've come to this point in their life and they're asking, is this it? Really? Is this all that it's about? And they've just become disenchanted with life. And I know that for myself, I go through phases of sort of just thinking, really, is this, what it's all about? And as you said, when I look at those places that I've been avoiding or where there's fear, there is a lot of life force energy. And in making sort of space to be able to, in a way that feels perhaps safe for you, is it like having in community? Is it creating a ritual kind of structure? But to go to those places where your edges are and keep pushing them out and do things which feel a bit edgy, because usually after that you get this sense of liberation, don't you? And this kind of wonder, like, wow, I can do this. And I think the more that we stretch ourselves, the more we access this, potential, the map of our soul that we have within us, that if we're not careful, we'll kind of just shrivel up and we'll not feel fulfilled, we'll not feel connected. And I wonder about like how we can more in, well, around the world, but be able to cultivate more ways of being together in community where we can explore this. And like for me, there was a real turning point when I started to visit graveyards as a way of honoring the dead. And it began quite spontaneously of just singing. And then sometimes it would evolve into more of a keening, of a lament to them. But the first time I went, I remember feeling terrified. It was after I'd seen a film at the cinema with about Bob Marley, and I think he'd said to the Wailers, before they were going on stage and they were having sort of stage fright and feeling quite fearful, that you need to go and sing to the dead at night. That was his instruction. And it really hit somewhere for me. Like, oh, that feels strange, but there's something in that for me. So I went straight to a cemetery from the cinema and entering into the sort of darkness and the gate and feeling all those sort of, stories of childhood coming in and this isn't a safe place to be. That something sort of eventually began to melt away. And it's like the armor that we create between ourselves and the world around us to feel safe means that we're less able to feel like the intimacy, the fullness of what it is to be alive in all of its spectrum, from the joy and the wonder to the grief and the sorrow. And I think that's something which you point to in what you're sharing for me, which is there's no sort of right or wrong way of being. It's just about recognizing that all of it is experience, all of it is fodder for growth, for learning. And in that, there's nothing to reject. So there's things which we're afraid of or avoiding, actually, that they too are really worthy of coming in and becoming a part of our kin, or our kind of constellation of being. Yeah, some of the things I wonder about.
Thank you for that. Yeah, beautiful. There's some statistics I've been gathering recently, and one of which is around 70% of people in the West die with a major life regret.
Mm.
And so this is a statistic that's come out of hospices in the West. And I stumbled on that one about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And this idea of living without regrets has now become really close to me and what I'm trying to do. And yeah, the meditation also that you mentioned, the one Buddhist monks do of meditating on their own death each morning, so that they can step into each day with full gratitude for being alive. Because what I've noticed from the last 2 or 3 years, looking around and sort of just trying to get a handle on the whole sort of situation of humanity, is that certainly in the West, we've entered into an era where, because we don't talk about death, because it's not taught in schools, even though death is the only thing in life that's guaranteed. There's no education wrapped around it, and so generations of people are going through life taking life for granted. And when you take life for granted, you have this feeling like you're going to live forever, or certainly maybe you're living the life that's being promised to you in Hollywood movies. And as a result of that, you don't hold everything around you as sacred and precious, and therefore it's kind of expendable.
Mm.
So our environment is expendable, our bodies are expendable, and this conversation around mortality is extremely important to, the survival of our species, I believe. And certainly I see it now as a massive blocker to human evolution, that this conversation around mortality has been swept under the carpet, and we pretend we're going to live forever. And so, yeah, I've been trying to figure out what to do about this. And one of the ideas I've come up with recently is a meditation that is an evolution of that Buddhist meditation. But instead of thinking every day about, or meditating every day about your death, I'm actually starting to take people to their death. But how do you want to feel at the end of your life? And this is sort of subtle but significant difference. And getting people to meditate on the feeling they want to have at the very end of their life, of no regrets. So a life well lived, a life where everything you needed to say got said, everything that you needed to do got done. And I believe that the more we can meditate into that feeling, that if you believe in manifestation, you will bring that feeling into existence at the end of your life. And intuitively, if you can reach that feeling, it also means that everything before it has taken care of itself to get you to the ultimate feeling of peace and satisfaction at the end of life. And I'm actually now turning that into an AI tool as well, that you can fill out. So there'll be questions that you fill out in a little questionnaire, and then you get given your ultimate life plan, as it were, that starts today. It gets you to how you want to feel at the very end of your life. And I feel like we sort of need to talk about mortality a lot, and figure out ways to make it as accessible as possible to the mainstream, not just to the people who already understand this wisdom. I think the challenge is, how do you get this conversation out there and make it not just, just let people know that it's very important, but make it irresistible to people. Because I find talking about this thing the most fascinating thing there is to talk about, because ultimately what we're talking about is how to live fully, and it's an exploration of consciousness.
Mm. Yeah, how to make death sexy.
Yeah, basically, you know, but that's the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
We need people, if to get people's attention, it has to be sexy, or we have to dangle a carrot in front of them that gets them into the conversation. That's why I talk about purpose a lot alongside death, because if you're just talking about death, lots of people will just immediately put down their defense barriers or walk away or feel triggered. But if you say, hey, if you have this conversation, it's the first step towards deeper potential and purpose in life. Then people are like, oh, I want that. Tell me more.
Mm. There's a practice, it sounds similar to the meditation that you're creating, but in a different way, perhaps, that I've invited clients that I do soul friending with to write their own eulogy. And there's often a lot of resistance to it, but you have to go through a deep process of reflection, on your life thus far, but also imagining into, what does feel unfulfilled for you. Are there regrets that you still have you want to resolve? And how would it be, looking back at your life or hearing people speak at the end of your life about what your life was about? What did you bring? What was your medicine that can then help us, as you say, kind of, right, so I'm here, how do I get there? And then you start to kind of bring in, however the universe works and creative imagining what it is that we need to then live that kind of life. So I think it does really help as a practice to be able to imagine in these ways, to also help expand our consciousness really to what we've been avoiding in many ways. So it sounds fascinating that you also get a kind of plan of action by the sounds of it, the AI tool.
That's it. Yeah. I feel like I've got lots of ideas around this. I think it's how do you make it really interesting and have a clear benefit for people so that you draw them in and they can enter softly into this kind of thinking and conversation, but with that goal that actually they're going to get something very, very valuable. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to die with regrets,
Mm.
right? That feels like a curse for anybody. So I'm going through a kind of challenging process at the moment, finding the right language and messaging wrapped around what is a very sticky and thorny subject that
Mm.
triggers a lot of people. And as we all know, most people don't want to confront this conversation at all. So
Mm.
that's the challenge. And I guess the system that we live in, even though I don't love the system that we live in, has certain rules and ways in which you can engage with large numbers of people. So I'm sort of tapping into, for example, the 15 years I spent directing TV ads and selling ideas to people. They were mostly, I spent 15 years selling people stuff they didn't really need. But I did learn a skill about how to think about getting an idea in front of people so that they will, you know, engage with whatever that product is.
Mm. Mm. Well, I forward to seeing how things evolve with the subject
Yes.
and what you're offering. It feels to me that there has been a bit of a shift. Maybe it is more in the sort of circles that I live within, but just that grief has made quite a kind of resurgence into more popular culture in the last, let's say, maybe 5 years. I remember when I first began, or I offered grief services because nobody else was doing it that I was aware of in my area. And that's become a lot more, well, we understand more the benefits of it, the need for it, certainly in community kind of structures. But it's interesting that it's kind of not been connected so much with the death piece as it could be. Because I think, as you say, it's just not something a lot of people want to talk about or go there. And language is so important about how we can make it really palatable. And I've met that in talking about the sacred, that there's still certain words that are really triggering for people because of their background and, upbringing. And so how can we find the words that are just accessible, across the board?
Mm,
And I think there's a lot in symbols as well and
mhm.
images that can really sort of tap into something deeper than that, and creativity.
Yes.
Mm.
And there's maybe an idea that we need new language as well,
Mm.
because a lot of the old language is tarnished now.
Yeah.
It's associated with all sorts of derogatory things and negative connotations. So yeah, there's potentially we need a whole new language paradigm. But I feel like the conversation around grief and death is becoming more prominent recently, because arguably we're entering into quite an existential time in human history, with a lot of things out there that feel like threats to our existence, whether it's
Mm.
climate change or AI, you know, taking over our jobs or the planet or whatever it is. So I do feel this is the time for these conversations, and I do feel people will connect. There's a beautiful expression, a Chinese proverb, which is, "It's an honor to live in troubled times,"
Mm.
and I do feel like we are in troubled times at the moment. But what happens in troubled times is it forces people into these conversations, and it forces people to step out of their comfort zone and actually do something about the problems that they feel deep in their heart. Because often people look around and realize, oh, no one's actually doing anything about this, so maybe I should do something. And then what you see is people's true spirits emerging as people step into their courageous entrepreneurial problem solving selves, and you see generations of people waking up, and that in itself is an honor to witness, you know, because would you rather have a life where there's almost no drama and nothing really happens and everyone just stays in their bubbles, and we don't, people don't really step into their truest courageous selves? Or would you rather live in dramatic times and witness people's real spirits emerging? Yeah, it's
Mm.
an interesting question.
Mm. Well, it's my sense that we chose to be here for these times, and that our role is very much the midwifing of death, but also birth. It's like both are happening simultaneously. And how can we hold that, full spectrum with as much curiosity and attentiveness and gratitude as possible? And I think just
Mm,
cycling back to the question of how life cycles can help us live with more purpose, the recognition that death could come at any moment, for me, it really inspires me to live each day fully, as if it's my last. And what can I do today that leaves, something more beautiful, something that is a gift to someone or to nature? That we have that sense, for me, of more of like the giveaway. Like, I don't need to accumulate stuff and try and like build my sense of identity or these kinds of things. It's more about what can I give away so that I
mm.
can, meet death in that way that feels like I can surrender everything. Mm.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. Yes, and I just sort of, maybe my thoughts as we get to the end of our chat, just about, if you can take a moment to each day step into that awareness of the simple idea that we exist at all in this
Mm.
vast cosmos. The probability of us even being here having this conversation is so infinitesimally small and remote, and yet here we are, and this miracle of life is happening all around us. And just to remember that is a first step towards fears and limiting beliefs starting to drop away from
Mm.
around us.
Mm. How might you do that, Hoppy? Just like, is there a sort of invitation of something like as a daily practice or check-in to connect with that idea?
Yes, I mean, you know, there's this meditation that we've discussed a couple of times, where perhaps before getting up in the morning, you can lie in bed and just remember that you're alive, and perhaps start to feel into how you want to feel at the end of your life. I think is really powerful. There's the meditation that I've designed. It's called the Ultimate Meditation. It's available on my Substack, so you can go on there and read it and listen to it. But yeah, it's just 5 minutes, 2 minutes of that remembering that we're here, that life is a miracle, and that when you start to step into that headspace, you look around yourself and you just see life completely differently as this very, very precious, alive, and magical thing that we're getting to experience.
Hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. I'll be checking that out on your Substack page.
Cool. Well, look, thank you so much for the conversation, Isla. It's been
Oh, it's been
absolutely
great.
brilliant.
I always enjoy
Yes.
our musings on life, Poppy.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Hmm. I suppose I'm just aware of the season here anyway in England, of it being winter solstice this weekend coming. And
Mm.
for me, this is a time to really, imbibe the darkness and silence and stillness. And in that, those kind of constellate for me around death. And so I like to sit in darkness and just spend time, particularly across the threshold from light to dark. Maybe you go somewhere to watch the sunrise on solstice, but just to have the awareness of that moment of sort of death and rebirth and what it might be that you are ready to let die in your life. Is there something ritually you could do to mark that? Or is it just writing and just acknowledging that we are moving through this phase of transformation individually, but also collectively? So just taking some time to reflect on, maybe it's the past year and what has grown in your life and celebrating that, but also then what hasn't maybe served you or worked for you. Or maybe there has been some endings in your life, in work or, relationally, that just deserve to be honored and tended in a good and intentional way. And in that, we're then maybe less energetically still attached to the past or those parts. So doing something intentional around solstice, that would be an invitation for those that are here today.
Mm.
And thank you to those that have been with us for this
Yes.
conversation.
Thanks, everybody. Everybody.
Mm.
Just going to check very quickly if there's any questions. Does anybody have
Mm.
anything they'd like to say? Oops. You can always message us through Substack as well. Yeah, no questions. Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much, Isla. And
Thank you, Hoppy.
thanks, everybody.
Wonderful
Cheers.
to see you. Much love.
Yeah.
Live
All
well.
right. Bye.
Take care.